Back in the 80s, I grew up in a little village about 30 miles outside of Hastings, England. It was the kind of place you'd see on a postcard, cobbled streets, old thatched cottages, and gardens so perfect they seemed painted. Quiet, picturesque. Nothing ever happened there, until it did. When I was 12, an urban legend began to creep through the village. It centered around the local video store where I later got a Saturday job. The rumor went like this: someone had spliced 5 minutes of something horrifying at the end of a popular film. Nobody knew which one. Some said it was footage of missing children. Others whispered about a severed, monstrous animal head. Childish nonsense, or so I thought. How I wish it had been just that. The truth was far worse. Did I find the tape? Oh, I found it. I wish I hadn't. The video store was where I spent most of my time, especially with my best friend Leopold. His older brother, Ulysses, was the first to mention the tape. Ulysses was in the same school year as my sister before she died. I don't remember much about her death, just that she went to summer camp alive and came back in a coffin. She was 16, artsy, full of life. After her death, kids in the village began marking buildings and lampposts with colorful designs, a tribute to her creativity. I thought it was sweet. Her school held a big assembly in her honor, and I had to stand up in front of everyone to say something nice about her. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. That year was a blur of grief, but I managed to get the video store job. One perk was that I could take a movie home every weekend. New releases were mine, and Leo was jealous, which made it even better. He stayed over most weekends, and my parents didn't mind. They thought it was good for me. After all, I just lost my sister. One Saturday, I brought home Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. We couldn't wait. Everyone at school had been raving about it. Our village didn't have a cinema, and the nearest one in Tunbridge was an hour's bus ride away, so this was a big deal. We rushed to my room, threw ourselves on my bed, and jammed the cassette into the VCR. The movie was incredible. Leo and I argued over whether Indiana really affected the plot, but as the credits rolled, something odd happened. The screen didn't go black. Instead, a faint ticking noise rose from the speakers. Then, a new scene began. It showed someone tied to a chair. A girl, maybe, though it was hard to tell with the bag over her head and her tattered clothes. Suddenly, another face filled the screen. Bloodshot eyes staring right at us. Leo and I froze, hearts pounding. The man leaned back, revealing more of himself. He was wearing Indiana Jones' outfit, complete with a whip coiled at his side. His face, though it was a grotesque cardboard cutout of Indy's, distorted and wrong. He spoke, his voice calm but crackling with menace. "Now that I've got your attention, welcome to the real show." He ripped the hood off the captive girl's head like a waiter unveiling a dish. Her face was streaked with dirt, her eyes wide, tears carving pale rivers through the grime. She whimpered softly, and the man just stood there, grinning. That was when the nightmare truly began. I didn't know the girl, and when I glanced at Leo, he shrugged. He didn't either. Her mouth was gagged with a filthy cloth. Her teeth clenched tight as she bit down nervously. She writhed in the chair, desperate to break free, but each movement brought fresh waves of agony. Blood streaked down her arms, glistening under the harsh light. That's when I noticed them, small glinting silver razors embedded in the ropes binding her. Every struggle sliced her skin anew. The man's voice slithered through the speakers. "Tonight, this girl dies because you didn't listen. But now I get to have a little fun." Leo and I stared at each other, frozen. The man lunged toward the camera, filling the screen with his grotesque mask. We flinched hard. "Yes, you," he hissed, pointing directly at us, or so it felt. He spun back toward the girl, uncoiling the whip from his waist. "All of you watching this, take note. After this girl's death, you'll each mark a black spot on a lamppost in your town. No exceptions." He circled behind her, draping the whip over her throat. Her back arched against the pressure, her eyes bulging in terror. "If I don't see 100 black spots by January 23rd, he paused, tilting his head as if savoring the thought. "I'll take another. One from each of your towns, and then another, and another." I felt my stomach drop. January 23rd? That was Monday. The man tightened his grip, the whip digging cruelly into her neck. His laughter turned into a high-pitched, unhinged cackle. Then, with a sudden jerk, he yanked hard. The girl convulsed, her body rigid as a horrible gurgling sound filled the room. Blood spurted, and her chair tipped slightly forward. Leo turned away just as urine spilled from beneath her seat. The sound of her choking burned itself into my mind, a noise that would haunt me forever. I bolted from the bed, lunging for the VCR. My hands fumbled at the eject button, slamming it repeatedly. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear over it. Finally, the tape began to spit out, but I was too frantic. I pulled too hard, and the tape caught in the reels. It snapped, spilling tangled black film onto the floor. I gagged. The bile rose too fast, and I vomited all over the ruined tape. Moments later, Leo followed suit, retching violently onto the carpet. We cleaned up as best we could, though the smell lingered, a sour reminder of the nightmare we just witnessed. Sleep never came that night. When dawn broke, we stumbled to the breakfast table like ghosts, hollow and pale. We debated telling my parents, but what could we say? With the tape destroyed, who would believe us? That's when an idea struck me. I leaned close to Leo and explained. His eyes widened. "That's actually smart. But what if we don't have time to hit them all?" "We'll make time," I said. We pooled our money and hopped on our bikes, pedaling straight to the hardware store. To our horror, it was closed. Desperate, we banged on the door until old Fred poked his head out of the upstairs window. He wasn't happy, but he eventually sold us a pot of black paint and 2 brushes. With supplies in hand, we rode all day and into the night, marking every lamppost we could find. We even doubled up in some areas, just to be safe. By the end, we'd traveled nearly 40 miles, exhausted but determined. I don't know if it worked. I don't know if we saved anyone or if the man just stopped, but after that, I never saw another black spot in my village. Life went on. When I turned 18, I left for college, and my parents saw me off from our perfect little garden, beaming with pride. The memory of that night faded as the years passed. College consumed me, and I buried myself in studies and a busy social life. Eventually, I landed a great job, met an amazing woman, and built a life I loved. I moved from place to place, chasing opportunities until I finally settled down. But funny, isn't it? How something so small can drag a memory back from the shadows. It wasn't a sound or a smell that did it this time. Just a single small black spot on the lamppost outside my front door. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. It couldn't be. It had to be a mistake, just a smudge, maybe from a passing truck or some kid kicking a football. But the more I stared at that black spot, the more the comforting lies unraveled. Coincidence? No, reason wouldn't grant me that mercy. I backed away slowly, the weight of dread pressing on my chest. My steps faltered as I reached the front door. My hand trembled on the handle, but my mind was elsewhere, dragged back to the sound of the girl's gurgling, her last awful gasps replaying with crystal clarity. I had to do something. The only place that made sense, the local video store. Maybe, somehow, they'd know something. Even as I thought it, I knew it was absurd. I lived over 45 miles from my childhood home now, still. Had he followed me? I bolted to my car and drove, my knuckles white against the wheel. 5 minutes later, I was parked outside the Blockbuster, only to find it dark and abandoned. Of course, it had gone under last year. My pulse thundered in my ears, but somewhere in the haze of panic, a thought emerged in almost otherworldly certainty. I knew where I had to go. The drive was long, my hands clenching and unclenching as I tried calling my wife, No answer. Again and again, not unusual. Jessica's a corporate banker, always tied up. But today, the silence felt different, like the calm before something terrible. Finally, I arrived in my hometown. My father still lived here, and I visited often, but this time wasn't for him. I pulled up outside the old video store, now shuttered. Its once familiar windows were plastered with posters for upcoming raves, and the rest was painted over in thick white chalk. But curiosity gnawed at me. I leaned in, peering through a small gap in the paint. My breath hitched. Inside, amidst the gutted shelves and empty displays, one solitary rack remained. On it, a single tape. I didn't need to see the label to know what it was. My heart drummed in my chest as I forced the door. It creaked open, and I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing like a thief's. The shelf loomed ahead, and there it was, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. With shaking hands, I reached for it. But when I opened the case, it wasn't a tape that greeted me. It was a phone. Confused, I pressed the home button. My stomach dropped as a photo flickered onto the screen. It was me and Jessica, smiling on our last vacation. My hand clenched around the phone as dread coiled tighter. This wasn't possible. I hit redial on my wife's number, still nothing. Then, I noticed the note. Taped to the inside of the case, in jagged black letters, "Call me." Without hesitation, I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, then connected. A FaceTime call. My worst nightmare came to life as the screen lit up. Jessica stood motionless inside a translucent box. The surface facing the camera was dotted like a vintage comic strip, making her look trapped between worlds. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, but her body was rigid, unable to move. "Hello again," a voice CRONED. My stomach turned as he stepped into view, still wearing that cardboard Indiana Jones mask, now warped with time. His body was thinner, his head bald and pocked with scabs. He danced a twisted little jig, his laughter sharp and grating. "Let her go, you sick bastard," I yelled, "or I swear I'll—" "Hurt me?" he cut in, mockingly. He spun around, the sores on his scalp catching the dim light. "You played my game once before. But you cheated." My mind reeled. "What are you talking about?" He stopped mid-dance, his masked face tilting toward the camera. "You and little Leopold painted all the marks yourselves. Didn't you think I'd notice?" I thought my message was spreading far and wide, but no. My tape never came back. The blood drained from my face. He knew everything. He snatched the phone from its stand and waltzed toward Jessica, his grotesque dance accentuated by the jerky movements of his limbs. "How could anyone know about my games if the tape never made it back?" he sneered. Then, with a sudden violent motion, he slammed the phone against the plastic wall of Jessica's prison, inches from her terrified face. Her muffled voice came through, barely a whisper. "Please, help me." I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The strange dotted texture on the clear surface of the box wasn't just glass. No, it was worse. The dots were rows upon rows of syringes, their needles poised dangerously close to Jessica's skin, each one stained with traces of dark congealed blood. The masked man leaned into the frame, his voice dripping with mockery. "Ah, you've noticed. Yes, my little masterpiece. Jessica here can move. Oh, she could if she wanted to, but why risk it? These needles," he said, gesturing flamboyantly, "are filled with lovely little cocktails, generously donated by our friends in the underworld. Hepatitis, HIV, maybe even a few things science hasn't named yet. All she has to do is flinch." He shifted the camera, giving me a side view of the box. Jessica was pressed tightly against the back wall, every muscle in her body rigid with fear. The needles hovered millimeters from her arms, her legs, even her throat. "You sick bastard!" I screamed. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" He cackled, spinning in place. "Fun, it's all about fun." Your sister enjoyed our little games too. She was delightful. The air left my lungs as his words hit like a sledgehammer. You killed her, I whispered, the realization clawing at my sanity. He tilted his head as if savoring my agony. One of my earliest works. Back when I was just getting started. Oh, how the kids at Hawker's High loved painting the town black afterward. They made me a legend. His laughter rang out, a high-pitched, unhinged cackle as he spun off screen. The laughter stopped abruptly. Slowly, his masked face slid back into view, only his bloodshot eyes visible through the crude Indiana Jones cutout. Now, he hissed, for my final game. The one for the boys who thought they'd beaten me. For you to win, Ben, you must kill Leo. What? I gasped. You're insane. I don't even know where Leo is. I haven't seen him in years. He hummed, tapping the mask thoughtfully. Curious. He said the same about you. He turned the phone to face Jessica again, her eyes filled with silent pleas. But don't worry, I know exactly where both of you are. In fact, he paused for effect. Leo should be arriving any second. As if summoned by those words, the front door burst open with a shattering crash. I jumped as glass shards sprayed across the floor. Standing in the doorway was Leo, older, broader, and unmistakably angry. In his hand was a gun, its barrel trained directly on me. Leo, wait, I shouted, raising my hands. It's me, Ben. We can figure this out. His face was a mask of rage and desperation, tears carving paths through the thick beard that now framed his jaw. Too late, he growled, his voice cracking. This is your fault, Ben. Your idea to paint the lampposts. You dragged us into this nightmare. He has Jessica too, I pleaded. We can still fix this. Just put the gun down. But Leo didn't budge. He pressed the gun against my forehead, his weight and size making resistance futile. My legs trembled as I felt the cold metal dig into my skin. End it, he muttered, his voice hollow. It's the only way. My eyes clenched shut, waiting for the shot that didn't come. Instead, the pressure suddenly lifted. I opened my eyes to see Leo crumpling to the floor, the weight of his emotions crushing him. Relief flooded my body, but before I could act, the man's mocking voice erupted from the phone in my hand. Boys. No hugs just yet. His laughter returned, more deranged than ever. The lives of your precious wives hang by a thread. Think carefully about your next move. Jessica's muffled sobs echoed through the phone. I scanned the room in desperation, my eyes landing on an old billboard stand propped against the wall. It was missing its centerpiece, its character from the film. A dark idea crept into my mind, and I clenched my fists. This wasn't over. It was the sign I needed. Leo was a sobbing, broken heap on the floor, and before he could react, I snatched the gun from his trembling hands. His eyes widened in terror as he stumbled backward, his voice cracking in desperate pleas. Please, Ben, don't. I don't want to die. I have kids. I shoved him roughly to the back of the shop, away from any potential witnesses. My hands were shaking as I turned the phone toward me, staring into the grinning face of our tormentor. I kill Leo, and you let both women go. That's the deal. The man behind the mask tilted his head, his grotesque eyes sparkling with mockery. Oh, Benny boy, no. That's not how this works. I make the deals. His voice dropped to a low, malevolent purr. Here's your choice. You kill Leo, and Jessica walks free. Leo kills you, and Amanda gets to live. One wife survives. The other belongs to me. Spoils of war. His laughter crackled through the phone, a sound so unhinged it made my blood run cold. My heart thundered against my ribs, each beat a violent reminder of what I had to do. I'd never killed anyone, not even an animal. The weight of the gun felt alien in my hands, but the stakes left no room for hesitation. My finger twitched on the trigger. The deafening crack of the shot echoed through the shop. but his laughter only grew louder. He spun in manic delight, pirouetting like a demented marionette. The bullet had missed Leo, shattering the lock on the storage room door instead. Leo stood frozen, his face pale as the realization hit him he was still alive. I didn't give him time to process it. With a burst of adrenaline, I barreled into the door, slamming it open. The man stopped dancing, his head snapping toward me in surprise. I raised the gun, my vision narrowing to a singular purpose. This ends now. I squeezed the trigger again and again, each shot ripping through the cardboard mask and sinking into the flesh beneath. Blood sprayed in gruesome patterns through the bullet holes, splattering the filthy floor as he twitched and staggered. His grotesque dance turned into a convulsive stumble before he finally crumpled to the ground. The gun clicked empty in my hands. I tossed it aside and spat on his corpse. The room was silent except for the ragged gasps of Jessica, trapped in her needle-lined coffin. Across the room, Amanda dangled limply over a tub of pungent liquid bleach from the acrid smell that burned my nose. Both contraptions, each uniquely sadistic, were still operational. Leo snapped out of his trance, rushing toward Amanda as I sprinted to Jessica. I fumbled with the latch on the side of the box, my hands slick with sweat. Finally, the glass panel swung open, and Jessica collapsed into my arms, her body trembling uncontrollably. A tap on my shoulder made me turn, my heart lurching as I faced Leo's bloodshot eyes. "I thought you shot me," he murmured. I gave a weak nod. "Sorry, there wasn't time to explain." Jessica clung to me, her sobs muffled against my chest. I carefully pulled her away from the cursed contraption, guiding her toward safety. "How did you know he'd be here?" Leo asked as he supported Amanda, who was barely conscious. I led them out of the storage room, pausing by a battered old billboard stand propped against the wall. It displayed a weathered scene from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The boulder, the kid, the girl, they were all there. But Indiana? His figure had been meticulously cut out, leaving only a void. "When I saw this," I said, my voice hollow, I knew. Call it intuition, divine intervention, whatever. But I knew he'd be here, and I was right. Leo nodded, holding Amanda close as we stepped into the night. I didn't look back.